Good morning, everybody. If I can have your attention. We're a couple of minutes late, but I'm sure we'll try and catch up that time as we go on. For those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do not. My name is Nick Morris. I'm the chair of NHS Dumfries and Galloway for at least 7 more weeks. Normally, Gail would be chairing today, but she's unfortunately tied up travelling, so she is online, but she can't attend today. So I've stood in to chair this again today, my last meeting of the CPP. Welcome to everybody. Good to see everybody here, and good to welcome all those online too. Let's go straight to business. Can I just remind you all that we're going to be recording this live so the public can access this meeting, so if you just be aware of that, please. Stephen, can I give you an update on attendances and apologies?
Thanks, Chair. We have apologies from Joanna Campbell, no substitute. Apologies from Russell Griggs, but Jane Morrison-Ross is online. Apologies from Councillor Ian Howie. Jim McMillan from Police Scotland. Andy Kenna from Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, but Scott Irvin is here deputising. Councillor Stephen Thompson and Councillor Andy Ferguson is his substitute. Thanks, Chair. That's the apologies.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. And Nick, just aware that you've just rushed through the door. Are you ready to do your presentation when you come up on the agenda?
I am indeed, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, next item is the draft minutes of the meeting which took place on the 1st of March. First of all, any comments regarding accuracy? If none, then all the actions from there should have been transferred over to action logs and can be reported on. But Stephen, is there anything particular you wish to update us on from those minutes?
Nothing from the minutes here. No, thank you.
John, yeah.
Good morning. It was really just on item 4 of the action log, the ADP. I think just to comment that we were in attendance at Third Sector Dumfries and Galloway, and lots of learning from lived experience conversations from various people and the contributions around the various tables. So I think that was a really constructive way of doing that, and just to thank everyone who sort of brought that together. I think there's some learning that can be taken out of that, and lots of really useful conversations during the day.
Thanks very much, John. We'll make a note of that, but those thanks will be well appreciated by those organising it. Any other comments on the minutes before we accept them? Everybody happy to accept them as accurate then? Thank you very much. Community planning log. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. The majority are sitting at green at the moment. Just a few points to bring to everyone's attention. So, as John said, point 4, I've put a comment in about the very successful ADP Development Day, which was fantastic, as John said. In terms of some of the comments from the previous minute, we've got updates on the Shared Prosperity Fund and just clarification on the split from the Borderlands and Place Plan funds, which I know Councillor Campbell had raised that, and it's the same funding but 2 separate streams falling off from that. And then there was an update sent around board members on the 26th of April in relation to care experience young people and the Equalities Impact Assessment, so that narrative's covered in 8. And the one that's orange at the end is really the future items of business that are still to be programmed in. I'm liaising with the lead officers just to make sure that the timing's right and they're able to come with a comprehensive update. Thank you.
Any questions to Steve on the action log? None? Great. Thank you very much for the update, Steve. Without further ado then, if you're ready, Nick, can we go straight into your presentation? So I'd like to thank Nick for coming along. This is an ask of the CPP from December last year, when we asked if it's possible to get an update on the work that Nick and his team are doing. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much. Just to quickly introduce myself, for the last 10 months, I have been the independent chair of the Dumfries and Galloway Tackling Poverty and Inequalities Partnership. I was down here about a year ago to be interviewed on an extremely hot day, a lot nicer day than it is today, and was appointed shortly after that interview. Previously involved in work in D&G on the review of the previous poverty and inequalities strategy. That was back in 2020, in the midst of in the midst of lockdown and the development of various action plans following on from that. So it kind of feels as if I'm marking my own work a little bit when I've come in to progress this. I wanted to present, to sort of start off quickly in conversation with Stephen, some slides that I'd used at a recent meeting of the Alcohol and Drugs Partnership, which was looking at cost of living crisis. And I wanted to present something of a national picture before sort of going down to Dumfries and Galloway level. I think we've been through crisis after crisis, I think, over the last decade. 2022 and 2023 years of economic crisis, cost of living crisis. I think the thing to remember is that even if the inflation stats, etc., aren't that worrying, or aren't as worrying as they were 2 years ago, the impact has now been baked in. And it will take time for that impact to erode as wages, etc., and benefits rise. And the erosion of that impact will be partial, it'll be gradual, and it'll be very, very uneven in terms of the impact. Back to the start of 2023, in a sense, we've probably been through a little bit of a hump since then, but survey figures were suggesting across the UK that 27% of households could not afford to turn the heating on when needed, 80% were cutting back on energy use, 45% weren't quite in that, some of that 45% were worried about energy bills, 28% were not able to eat balanced meals, 11% had gone hungry in the last month, and 23% of people on means-tested disability benefits were severely food insecure. 42% of folk in the lowest income quintile were cutting back a lot on the spending. So the impact was being felt across bottom half of the population, but more severely by folk in the lowest quintile and most difficulty. You can see the impact as well of the cost of living crisis, the rise in fuel bills in terms of the figures in Scotland for fuel poverty, 31% in 2022, which had risen from 25% in 2019, and extreme fuel poverty, 20% of household income going on fuel essentially, 18.5% from 12.4% in 2019. And all this is after a year when, sort of a decade of stasis at best, when things have got no better and for many people have got significant worse, even going into the cost of living crisis. The local picture in D&G, and I've got the question mark at the top because it was notable when some of these stats were presented by Public Health Scotland at a recent meeting of the child poverty subgroup. There was a sharp intake of breath around the room when they saw some of these. I think there is still, even locally, the image of D&G as a green and prosperous area. I think green is correct. You can look at these figures and argue about prosperous, I think, is the truth of it. Lower levels of employment, particularly amongst men. Lower wages, and I think that's really significant. Only 5 local authorities in Scotland have lower proportions of people earning the real living wage. Full-time earnings, you can see there the comparison between Dumfries and Galloway in Scotland at about £104 more. When we get into folk who are under particular pressure, Paula Doherty from the council, I think she's quite right when she states that the figures in receipt of council tax benefit give a feel for those households who are really under really significant financial pressure, 13,150 across D&G. That pressure becomes even more acute for the 5,570 awards of crisis grants. There'll be fewer than 5,570 people, but that means that on 5,570 occasions in the last year, people were sufficiently under pressure that there was concern about their ability to meet basic household needs, and therefore they were awarded with crisis grants. Remembering those figures on the previous slide about fuel poverty, Dumfries and Galloway has higher levels of fuel poverty than Scotland. You can't get 2022 figures, unfortunately, but the 2019 figures are there as you witness. So all the figures on the previous slide about people being reluctant to put heating on, etc., you can add a bit in terms of Dumfries and Galloway. I think the fuel poverty issue is a particular connection to what we're terming the rural poverty premium. People living in rural areas in Dumfries and Galloway have higher costs of living. So the headline poverty stats, which are based on an income measure relationship to median income, 60% to median income for poverty, etc., don't necessarily capture the impact of higher cost of living in rural areas. There are other approaches to measuring poverty that might, but they're more difficult to get a handle on locally. I'll came into post, as I said, last August. One of the things I wanted to do was to have a review of where we got to, but that's a fairly typical thing for somebody new into post to want. And I didn't want to impose it on everybody. But folk were quite happy 2 years now past the development of the action plans to review where the action plans had got to, whether things needed adding, subtracting, etc., and also to have a look at the processes involved in the partnership work. We've been asking questions about the membership and possible expansion of members. Are there people that we're missing within the structures that we have? We've been speaking about the effectiveness of meetings, both the admin support in between, and also I think the shift towards face-to-face is something that we're keen to do. It's all been online. I met for the first time a number of people connected with poverty work in D&G over the last sort of 6 months rather than the last 12, and rather than the first time that I was involved. And it's been a pleasurable experience, but it's a sign that in a sense we need to get back to face-to-face. There's an enthusiasm for that. We are looking at issues around people with lived experience and have a partial plan developed around that. Our current arrangements haven't quite been working there, so we've been revisiting those. There's been work done now to link to other partnerships. We've had other partnerships come and present to us, and also my presence at the ADP and speaking with the ADP chair as well. And I think we're going to extend that over coming months to make sure that we're pulling in the same direction, make sure that our issues are recognised in their work and that their work can influence our work. And I think there's real thinking to be done around the usage of data, both in terms of how we target services, but also how we identify individuals in potential need of support, creative use of data there, and also how we measure our impact. I think we don't currently measure our impact. I think there's a sense in which we pat ourselves on the back for making progress on our projects, and we're fairly confident they're making an impact, but we don't necessarily look too hard at that at the moment. That needs to change. There's also been a reprioritisation of tasks and new tasks added into the action plans as well. The subgroups are taking forward those action plans. The 5/4, depending how you cut it, subgroups that we have, they are the channel for the delivery of much of the work that we do. There's a fair number of achievements in there, and they're set out in the sort of the spreadsheet within the papers. A lot of work, good work around outreach. A lot of work, good work around information being got out to people in poverty. There was a particular challenge for the child poverty subgroup, which hitherto has been focused mainly on getting the report into the Scottish Government. That's its statutory duty that the Council and the NHS D&G have. That needs to shift. Reporting is important, but it needs to shift to be more action focused, and we're working on that quite hard at the moment. I think something that sits really with the partnership as a whole to take forward. We talked in the original strategy back in 2020 of taking a whole systems approach, bit of jargon, but essentially for this area of work that every organisation maximised its impact on poverty and reduces barriers to accessing its services that are created by poverty. We think there's two particular ways of doing this that we'd like to focus on. The first one of which is making sure that the Fairer Scotland duty on all organisations is extended and made real. So we think the Poverty Partnership should be a consultee far more than it is at the moment in terms of other policies that are developing. We deliberately took an approach in the strategy that didn't try to load absolutely everything into it and say that all these things impact on poverty. We focused on where we could have an additional impact, but that in turn means that we must influence some of that broader work, be it housing, be it transport, be it culture and leisure services, whatever. There are all areas where the issue of poverty needs to be considered. We can't do all of that, and I think one of the things we're looking at is in terms of a development of a template to allow others to do it on our behalf. I think there is something that we would seek in terms of engagement over resource allocation and within budget processes over the next while as well. The second big process is around the poverty audit, and we're interested in individual organisations, agencies, departments of the council, etc., looking at identifying what impact poverty has on access to the service they provide and how can they respond to that appropriately, and also identify how that intermediary role, that engagement that they have with people in poverty can be maximised in terms of acting as a bridge to advice, information and support. 4 joint initiatives that we're taking forward. There'll be a big fuel poverty campaign coming up this winter. There'll also, within that, be a focus on older people, disabled people, on warmth and safety. The concern about people sitting in houses heated to 10 degrees when they come home from hospital is something that sits with me very strongly, and that's part of the driver for that. We are looking at a referral portal to ease referrals between organisations within Dumfries and Galloway, which would involve organisations across the board, but particularly from the poverty angle, advice organisations. There is the Child Poverty Accelerator Fund, which is funding coming out of the Scottish Government to test new approaches to child poverty, and I was grabbed by Jim Brown on the way in to have a conversation that we'd been due to have in relation to some of that work. And rural poverty will be a big focus of what we do. It's difficult. Rural poverty premium is immensely difficult to tackle, but we have to. We are casting around for things that we can positively do around that. A couple of reflections quickly. Seems to me that the support and commitment is there. I've been really heartened. No one has sort of slammed the door in my face since I've been here, which has been a relief. But it's been more than that. It's been a positive commitment to things. When I arrived, first of all, there was a sense among some folk, I think, that the local partners hadn't necessarily entirely clued in to what they could do in terms of tackling poverty. It was seen as something that the major levers sit at Westminster, the major levers sit at Holyrood. And if that was the case, it doesn't feel as if it is. It is now, and that's nothing to do with me. That's to do with the local partners. But I think there is a communication task around that green and prosperous point that I made at the start. I'm kind of pleased with the progress that's been made. I think it now needs to accelerate. That there are areas that we now need to really get our teeth into. Rural poverty premium being just one. I think in terms of the subgroup, there's quite a lot of picking of low-hanging fruit, and that's fine because that's where you start. But I think there's more challenging work ahead. The referral portal, bringing some coherence to some of the sort of project-based stuff, which is having an impact and trying to either universalise it or make sure that it's fully joined up. There are some key projects that are only just now coming on stream, and we need to make sure that they bed in properly. Some really interesting work around the take-up of family and children's benefits being done with schools, for example, at the moment. And I think there's the need to really make that whole system approach real over the next while. Number of asks that we had, and I think it's just that essentially the continued support of partners around this table is key. We don't function, we don't work without that. I think when it comes to poverty proofing, making sure that we have our space within consultations, etc., that we can exercise our influence and share our expertise and share the perspective, not least of folk with lived experience, as broader policies develop within the council, and there's the chance to align some of the spending decisions with the priorities that have arisen from the partnership and strategy and action plans. Obviously, acknowledging still people's place within the decision-making process. I think it would be good to be able to really get going with a couple of poverty audits. I have a couple of willing volunteers, but as that process rolls out, for other departments, organisations to step forward and be willing to take part in that because they believe it's useful. It's a way of maximising their impact. And I think where there are priorities that we need help with, to be able to come to partners and to know that they're going to back us up and support the priority projects there will be really critical going forward. And that is me.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm going to bring in some people in a second, but there's a couple of things I should have said earlier I just want to highlight. I should have said at the beginning of the meeting that we're clearly in a position of waiting for UK elections, so we're in the PERDA process now, which means that organisations have to be very sensitive about how they present their actions and strategies, etc., not to be seen as aligned with any political position. Councillors around the table and councillors online clearly will be aware that they can't be called into supporting organisations at this point and taking advantage of press, etc., to make sure that is also neutral. So we just get into that. And that may have relevance in some of the conversations we have around the table today as well. Clearly, if we have conversations, be careful about how we are in terms of this group is supposed to be non-party political. It's about collaborative work across the partnerships, and that's how we need to focus today. So, Nick, thanks very much for that presentation. I don't know if it's going to be helpful while we have the discussion if one of those slides was put back up, if that's possible. You know the slide that talked about the two asks of us today? Okay, let's bring people in straight away, though, whilst we're getting that slide up. Alan, you wanted to come in, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Nick, for the presentation. At Senior Leadership Team, I think we had a really helpful and more detailed discussion that I won't rehearse today, but one of the questions I did pose, Chair, to Nick was around the future role of the Poverty and Inequalities Partnership in bringing together all of these work streams around addressing poverty. And in fact, I raised that at the last board meeting about what we do in terms of board oversight. I think, and for the reasons that you've mentioned in the pre-election period, I'll be careful what I say, but the statistics really released just yesterday on the latest child poverty levels across the UK are pretty stark. They are really worrying for Dumfries and Galloway, the highest in what, from my recollection, looks, or my understanding of the data, in almost a decade at 26.9%, and Dumfries and Galloway featuring in the top 10 areas in Scotland with the highest levels of child poverty. That suggests that despite lots of effort and commitment and activity, that we're maybe not making progress in some of the areas that we would want to. And I believe that as a partnership, there's a significant risk on our lack of oversight, to Nick's point, around outcomes and impact. We're rich in plan. We're not short in plan and activities and commitment, but we're very light, I think, overall as a partnership on outcomes and impact measures. Nick may have a view on how we do this, but I would like to specifically propose that the board actually set a direction for the senior leadership team to take a particular task of bringing together all of the work streams about addressing poverty, so that we do have a single view of all of the resources, all of the financial investment, all of the impact measures that are being used across our partnerships, and then come to a decision as to whether we think we're doing enough to address poverty in general, but child poverty in particular for that data. So it may be a comment that Nick might be able to help us, but more, Chair, I think a question or proposal for members of the board as to whether they support that activity. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. We'll come back to that proposition in a minute when we get a few more comments, if that's okay. Dawn, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nick, for the presentation. Really helpful and insightful, and very much taken by your comments in relation to needing to focus on impact and outcome, not activity. And the importance of evidence-based approaches is something that, you know, is really critical in that, so that we can be confident that the activity is actually going to deliver the impact and outcome that you know will have the biggest difference. I just wanted to support Alan's suggestion in terms of the opportunity to bring all of this together, and also advise the Community Planning Partnership Board that from a council perspective, full council at its March meeting agreed to establish a Tackling Poverty, Inequalities and Housing subcommittee of full council, and this reflects the cross-party priority and concern around poverty in particular, but also wider matters. And so our members will consider at full council at the end of June the terms of reference for that subcommittee. It will have a scrutiny role, it will have a decision-making role around council activity, but I think by bringing the partnership work together in the way that Alan has suggested, there's an opportunity to think about the relationship also from a council perspective with that member subcommittee. And so I just wanted the board to be aware of that, because that's a commitment from elected members across political groups to establish that body to provide a particular focus on issues around poverty and inequalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Before other people want to come in, there may have hands up by those people who are online. There's a couple of comments I'd like to make. Thank you, Nick. First of all, thank you for the presentation. And I agree with the comments that Dawn and Alan have said about trying to develop a proposal for bringing some of this work together. I'll come back to that in a minute, because I think we need to have a process for making sure that works properly. For me, having a population which isn't so concerned about poverty, with the high rates of poverty in this area, has a big impact on health. Clearly, we know there's lots of evidence about health impact as a result of poverty. We know that aspirations that young people have are severely affected by poverty, so their ability to grow and develop and achieve things in their lives is severely curtailed. And clearly, every organisation will be supporting a population that has well communities, and that's clearly impacted on by poverty as well. So it's in all our organisations' interest to have work to tackle poverty. Underlying where Alan was coming from is his proposition, one of the concerns I've got is, as you referenced, I think, we have far too many conversations here about groups and subgroups and strategies and policies that we're putting in place, but very little conversation about the impact of those policies and the outcomes of those policies and the outcomes of the work that's taken place with officers. And I've seen many a spreadsheet that talks about the hundreds of pounds and thousands of pounds that are spent on particular workers working in particular areas of the county, but with not a single item that tells me, so what's the benefit that's being accrued from that for the people that are supposed to be receiving it? And very crudely, you could almost say, let's take all that money instead and just give it to the people, and we might make a bigger difference, right? So unless we can evidence that we're making a significant difference through the use of this money through these initiatives, why wouldn't we just want to give it to the individuals concerned? I think that's the challenge that the public would present to us. So I would agree with Alan, I agree with Dawn that we need to do some work to make sure that we can actually evidence that the work we're doing collectively is of benefit. But my challenge to the organisation sitting around the table is, what are we doing in our own organisations, picking what your issue about access and various things, that minimises the impact of poverty in terms of their access to things like healthcare services. And I think all our organisations should go back through the officers group and try to identify what have they written into their plans that would be seen as addressing the issue of poverty in our area. And I think that comes to your first point about you having a right to sort of be a consultee on the delivery of plans. Is that right, Nick? If you want to talk a bit more about that, feel free to do so.
Just reminds me, I had an initial briefing conversation with Harry Hay in his new role, and we were talking about the difficulty of transport from Stranraer to cancer treatment in Edinburgh, for example. And you know, it might be fine for me or someone in my family if I was in those circumstances because I have a car and I can get in it and I can drive, but other folk aren't necessarily in those circumstances, and they're probably places that are worse connected than Stranraer. So poverty goes to the heart of a whole range of issues around access, not particularly easily resolved, I would agree, but it goes to the heart of those. If I can just pick up on Alan and Alan's point and Dawn's point, I don't think that a lot of the stuff that we do as a Poverty and Inequalities Partnership will shift that top line figure in terms of the number of people in poverty. I think a lot of what we will do will be to take people from severe, significant, whatever you want, to deep poverty to slightly less poverty, because I think that, in a sense, is often where the work of local councils has most impact. They can really mitigate the impact of the tides that are flowing against people. That mitigation is really important. You know, and I've devoted a professional life to working on that sort of mitigation. It really matters, but it doesn't necessarily affect that top line figure. So we will have to think more creatively about ways of capturing the outcomes while still being absolutely outcome focused in terms of extra income to people, in terms of reduced household outgoings, in terms of money saved through credit unions, whatever it may be, all that sort of stuff. So some of the stuff will be more complex than that headline. It's not to say that we won't sometimes shift folk either side of that threshold, but even shifting someone either side of that threshold doesn't necessarily capture the sort of real impact of things. What we do is work quite closely with the folk on the employability side, who are probably having a more direct impact, shifting people above the threshold if they get folk into work. It's one of the drivers that we don't tackle poverty. We don't tackle directly ourselves because, in a sense, the LEP and the colleagues there, they're doing that work. We have conversations with them. We inform their work. They inform ours. But we don't tell them how to butter their bread and suck their eggs sort of thing.
John, and then back to Alan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for your presentation, Nick. And I'm Councillor John Campbell, so I'm Chair of Westrans with that hat on. And you did touch on the transport situation, but it's not just only for people coming to, appointments in the health service or whatever, but I was looking at your appendix under subgroup 4. There's also parental employability that you've got as a project. Now, transport also features in that, if people can get employment somewhere, they still need the means to get there. So it's not really a question as such, but it's just part of the comment on transport. So it's not just health issues that affect people in poverty, but also the employability side as well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'll bring in Alan, then Val, and then go back to Nick for comments, and then see if there's any further questions.
Thanks, Chair. Just a brief response, and also interested to hear other views as well. I think Councillor Campbell has just made the point that actually, to Nick's point around some of the mitigating issues or understanding the need, for example, that sits with a partnership. There are some activities happening in the employability partnership. There's considerations in transport, and particularly in community transport projects around accessibility and inequalities. It's my very point that actually we're creating work streams to do individual elements of poverty when it very rarely sits on its own. Poverty isn't a factor that can be addressed on its own. It's multifaceted. And I think to your point, Chair, around understanding what individual organisations are doing, I think Stephen has coordinated what turned out to be a reasonably complicated piece of work recently at SLT on some of the LOIP outcomes and asking the organisations to identify on their own where they're contributing. I can't see why there wouldn't be a reason why we couldn't take poverty as an option and run the same exercise to understand that picture across the partnership. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a second recommendation from you there, Alan, so we'll come back to you. Val.
Thanks very much. I think, as Alan saying, it is really complicated because it spans so many different interrelated areas. And I think, Alan, what you're suggesting in terms of, if you want the senior leadership team to take away a kind of clear action in relation to that, what I would maybe suggest is, like, as we've done for the other kind of collaborative pieces of work and done a Pantana project, so we're actually really clear about what we're gonna do about it and the timescales for deliverables. I think the evidence is really clear though in terms of what we can do is, it's better employability, and we've all got roles as anchor organisations in relation to that, and income maximisation. So they are the areas that we should be focusing on, and in our LOIP we've got a really focused area on the employability gap and organisations signing up to do pieces of work in relation to that. We don't have something specific around child poverty though in that, and it may be that the disability employment gap will connect to the child poverty gap, but I do wonder if there is something specific that we should be collaborating on in relation to child poverty. So I guess that's maybe another consideration, a really focused collaborative work on that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Alan made a proposition earlier about... Sorry. John, did you want to come in? Yeah. So I missed that. Apologies for that.
No problem. Thanks, Chair. Nick, thank you so much for your presentation. Just an observation in one of the objectives regarding digital inclusion. Third Sector and Freezing Galloway did a piece of research on exclusion, and I suppose it's just really to make sure that we're not missing out a proportion of our community who have decided not to engage with technology, that they also are included as we move forward.
I think on a very practical basis, the emphasis of any number of the projects that we are supporting as priorities is on outreach and engagement, and not putting the reliance on just expecting people to get online and sort themselves out. I'm not sure we explicitly state that as a principle, but it's there like as if it was through a stick of rock in everything that we do, I think.
Okay. If you bear with me as well, I've got a couple of other comments, if that's possible, Nick. There's a link, I think, as Val's alluded to the anchor work that we're doing on employability, but there's also work on how we train our local population. And I still have a challenge to organisations about why we don't maximise more of the apprenticeship models. We lose a lot of our young people to universities who never come back. And if we had apprenticeship models, not only would we keep them in the local organisations, but we'd be giving them an income whilst they're here, which might produce more income into the local environment, which would improve our economy. I have no evidence to prove that, but it just feels that that's a logical way to go. So I'd be appreciative of some thoughts about that at some point as well. Another comment on Val suggested about child poverty work, which I think is obviously important, but I think one of the challenges that CPP has is we have lots of issues, and the tendency is to create another subgroup, another issue to tackle that issue, rather than trying to identify how our organisations are collectively working on our current plans, but make sure that they address those issues at the same time. So we all have a requirement in the NHS, for example, to deliver best possible healthcare. We can do that with a mind to ensure that access is improved for people regardless of where they live and regardless of their economic circumstances. And I guess all organisations can do the same. So I'd be minded to ask the SLT if they can be careful about the creation of extra work streams, but actually try to identify how poverty and child poverty and things like that can be addressed through the actions of the work streams already in place and through the LOIP as it's currently published, if that's possible, SLT. Is that okay? Do you want to come in?
Yeah, happy to do that. Like, I wasn't suggesting we do anything more, but I think there is work of the work streams that SLT could have more, pay more attention to, if you see what I mean, rather than it just being the annual update that comes, or the 6 monthly update that comes here. So I just wonder if there's something around about that. But happy to take the discussion back today and kind of come back with something to say, this is what we can do, so that we're just clear that what we get taken forward is meeting the needs of the board. So I can do that.
That's great. And I was going to suggest, based on Alan's proposition, that it's hard to formulate what that proposition actually means in this committee. So it might be better if the leadership team works with Alan, try and scope out what it was that Alan was asking for in detail, come back to us in September and get that approved by this committee. Is that acceptable? And if you find that that's too short a timescale, then clearly we do have a meeting in December, but let's try and keep the pressure on so that we can agree the outcome of that conversation in September. Is that all right? Alan?
Thanks, Chair. I agree. I think that would be helpful, and I also agree we don't want extra projects, particularly because a lot of the work is underway. I do think what's helpful today, though, to note is that the particular scope of what the board is asking for. So it's a reflection on the activity, the investment, the evaluation work that's happened before, and returning to board with a proposition about how that best could be taken forward here. What's the best mechanism to monitor that going forward with an outcomes and impact view rather than activity view. So I think so long as board is clear that that's a scope given to SLT, then I agree with your idea around SLT designing what that needs to look like.
Yeah, and then unless anybody disagrees, I think you captured in the last sentence there the scope of what we're asking you to. You can now go away, and clearly you're part of that group, so you can make sure you're true to that scope, okay? And then we'll look forward to, I won't be here unfortunately, but I would look forward to perhaps tuning into the screen and seeing how that is concluded in September. Is that okay? Any final points? Nick, do you want any final comments before you leave?
It was just quickly to come back on what you were saying in terms of apprenticeships. Obviously, the LEP is the is the main vehicle for work around that, and I know that area is a priority for them. There are challenges at the moment for anybody working certainly in the third sector, but beyond, around anti-poverty work in terms of actually getting staff. There are recruitment challenges that a number of organisations that we're working with are facing, and we're taking that seriously as something that we need to grapple with. Part of what we're doing, there are a couple of projects that we have which are sort of using the apprenticeship model, using the training model of folk who are currently out of work, train them up in poverty-related work. And so we are ourselves trying to take that approach in the way that we work, even though we're a much smaller anchor organisation than many of the other organisations around the table. But we're keenly aware of our responsibilities in that regard.
Great, thank you very much. Can we all thank Nick for coming up and doing his presentation today? Much appreciated, and we look forward to having an update in September on how this work's going to crystallise through the leadership team. Thank Thank you, Nick. Moving swiftly on, we've now got a presentation from the Resettlement Board. Liz Manson has keyed up some key individuals to support this presentation, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation about some of the impact that's having. So again, Liz and the presentation on, yeah, Liz is next door. Yeah. Okay, everybody. Liz, thank you very much for coming along to do your presentation on the work of the resettlement stream. I know you've got some individuals who work with you who are working with you on that work. I'll let you introduce them and do your opening comments, then get into the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to members of the board today. So in the next 20 minutes or so, the board members who are here today will give you some short, high-level contributions about the issues in their particular areas of responsibility, and we'll end with a short film which features some of our new Scots. And we'll be very happy then for hopefully about 10 minutes at the end to deal with any questions and feedback, and that will inform our evaluation report. As the Chair indicated, we're sort of conscious that we're in the pre-election period, and much of immigration policy and the details are politically sensitive, but we trust that the information you've had over the years in our briefings gives you the context for what we're presenting today. And at the end of the meeting today, for those members who are in person, we'd be delighted to meet you next door for some coffee and some baking from some of our new Scots, because certainly one of the things we've discovered over the 8 years of this programme is we all share a love of food. So we would very much like you, if you have time, just to pop next door and say hello to some of our new Scots. So the first couple of slides then are some of the basics about the overall programme. In terms of finance, as again you'll have seen over the years, it has been a very complex financial and reporting framework to both Scottish and UK governments. Each of the schemes, Syrian, Afghan, Ukrainian and asylum seekers, has got very different reporting regimes, different ways of claiming money, different ways of tariff funding coming to us. So that's certainly been one of the features of the programme over the years. And as a board, we have taken, I think, a very prudent approach to expenditure. We've done a lot of forecasting work to make sure that we were keeping enough money over the years for our future commitments. And we have staff in post and certainly sufficient funding up until the end of this phase, which is at the end of December this year. And part of the future work is for the board to look at what happens after the end of this year, particularly because some of our numbers will be changing, as you would see in the covering report. In terms of performance, we've met all our performance reporting requirements, and we've had very positive feedback both from Scottish and UK governments and the senior leadership team each year, which in terms of governance, We have done an annual report, both about how the partnership has operated and what we've delivered. The programme board has met fortnightly. We keep having an aspiration that we'll be able to reduce the frequency, but each time we sort of get to that stage, something changes or something new comes along. So I do have to acknowledge the time and the investment that partners have put into this piece of work over these 8 years. We can move on then to the next slide, which is about communications. The current chair of the the current chair of the communications workstream is Rory Thin-Smith. And some of the issues just to flag to you about communications work is that we have had a very positive welcome from organisations, from those of you here who have met some of our new Scots. The staff themselves have been so positive and so supportive. Volunteers, you will know that the Refugee Action Charity Mool, Multicultural Association, Crichton Trust and many others have played a very significant part in the whole programme over the years, and it's been a true partnership. Our local media have been extremely understanding of the need for privacy and respecting the space of our new Scots, and have certainly ensured that any coverage, and there has been limited coverage, which has allowed them all to settle and live their own lives as normal residents in our region. And indeed the neighbours where our new Scots have been living. These have been a very significant factor in the successful resettlement of the new Scots over the years. Perhaps not surprisingly, face-to-face engagement is the way that our new Scots have found most effective, but we've also had a newsletter which goes out online. We've set up a New Scots Dumfries and Galloway website, and there's also all sorts of different social media forums which different groups of New Scots have found helpful. So we use whatever is best and whatever our New Scots audience wants to use. For yourselves, we hope that the regular programme of briefings has made sure that you've always been kept up to date, that we've informed you of changes, and that we have highlighted where your organisations are playing a part in supporting the programme. One of the particular features we had is the briefing that we did in the question and answer about asylum seekers was highlighted at national level as the most balanced and informative piece of work that they had seen about asylum seekers in any forum or any organisation. And I think that certainly we're grateful to the communications workstream for the standard of work that they are producing. If we can move on next to education and employment, and if I can hand over to Anne McShane. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. I'm Anne McShane. I'm the lead for the Education and Employment Workstream within the Resettlement Board. Just to give you a very brief overview of some of our school, our English language in the community for adults, and employment as well. We've had an extreme warm welcome from all schools across Dumfries and Galloway for our resettled young people. That's right from nursery to S6. Our highest concentration has been in the Dumfries schools, but there are, out of 75 of our 113 schools have pupils with additional language needs within their schools. So our progression stages for pupils are stage 1 new to English, up to stage 5 where they're fluent, and that can take up to 10 years, but we've had extremely good support from our educational colleagues. In terms of English as a second or other language, we have a range of classes across the authority. Lifelong learning lead in the community-based support, and this moves on to Dumfries and Galloway College, who do accreditation courses, and we also have our third sector as well, such as DGMA involved in that. We have a pathway in place of non-accredited learning and also accredited learning, so it goes from pre-beginners up to level 5, and it can take 80 hours of class learning to move between our language levels. We also have different projects of support for people as well in place to provide recognition and evaluation of international qualifications and skills so they can move here and get the paperwork they need to move on to employment. And we also have a system in place. They can be tested for their higher education through the British Council tests, which is essential to go on and study and for career development. In terms of employment, we have had huge success, especially with our Ukrainian resettled guests. We've had a lot of support from a variety of sectors: hospitality, retail, forestry, farming, construction, care. We have a range of resettled guests all throughout employment in D&G throughout the whole authority. Their culture has been extremely keen to move into employment, to move into work, and motivation is very high. In terms of our Syrian guests as well, we've had a high concentration going on to self-employment, setting up their own businesses. So everything's in place through employability, DWP, etc., to get the support that's needed. Thank you, Liz.
Great, thank you very much, Anne. And I'm hoping that Louise Cumley is online.
I am, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Great. That's super, thank you very much. So we can just add, the slide moved on. If I could ask Louise, who's the Health and Social Care Lead. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Liz. Yes, so we have health assessments now in place for our asylum seekers in contingency hotels. I have to say that the health team that has been put together through health protection and our immunisation teams have been absolutely fantastic in their responsiveness. However, it does present us with challenges because we often get 24, 48 hours notice of arrivals into the contingency hotels, which means that's quite difficult to pull together the necessary staffing. The health assessments are complex and holistic because that's often the needs of the people that we're doing the health assessments with, and a number of onward referrals are required. We try and do them in a timely way because if we leave too long a gap between arriving and the assessments, what we have discovered over time is that people tend to present out of hours and A&E for things which really doesn't require an out of hours or A&E response. The challenge is compounded by registration with GPs has to happen after the assessment has been completed. So that means if people do present A&E or out of hours before their health assessment and it's not appropriate, A&E are not really able then to direct people to their GP because they don't have one. What I have to say is our health assessment team are fantastic in trying to pick up those people in the interim to try and support them and make sure they're having their health needs met. That health assessment team also includes a mental health practitioner whose work, she has got a lot of work to do with our new Scots, and her help's been invaluable to the team to support them, both with some of the traumatic stories that they're hearing, but also trying to manage that for themselves. Just checking my notes. The other issue that's come up for us is around dental provision. So some of our new Scots have quite significant and complex dental needs. I'm not going to talk at length about dental provision, but some of those needs are beyond what we can do within our student dental programme, which is where we would usually ask people to go. And that leaves them really just in receipt of the emergency dental provision. It's an ongoing conversation and we'll continue to work on that. We've had great cooperation and support from our GP practices. We have managed to manage all the registrations for the people arriving, even at very short notice. There has been some inequity, particularly across Dumfries, in the GP practices that have been picking up some of our Ukrainian visitors who've moved out of the welcome hubs, and I'm working with my local authority and social work colleagues to make sure that there's equity of the spread of our visitors across our GP practices. As I've put in there that we've had particular support from our mental health services from within our crisis teams. We we absolutely are picking up the mental health needs within psychology for the trauma that has been experienced by this client group. That is made a little bit difficult for some of our clients because they're not certain about where they're going to be living. Their application to remain has not been completed, and that can make that work difficult, but we're continuing to work with them and picking up those referrals as we can. I think that's enough from me, Les.
Great, thank you very much, Louise. And the next issue, homes and housing, and the workstream lead, Jan Hasty.
Thank you. I'm actually the lead for social work, and I'm here in my capacity as Homes and Housing Chair. So, as many of you will be aware, that the government has recently declared a housing emergency, and that affects us greatly, actually, in our key findings of lack of social housing for resettlement schemes, including obviously Ukraine, Afghan scheme, and our asylum dispersal accommodation. This is obviously, is a risk for us, and as I said, it reflects in it the national position. We have had a commitment from the Common Housing Board to provide 19 houses over a 3-year period. Unfortunately, that was delayed because of the humanitarian crisis. And a number of those properties that had initially been, committed for Afghan scheme have been used for the Ukrainian scheme. So as I say, it's across the board at the moment, but we still are working very closely with our housing partners to ensure that we have appropriate properties. More recently, our home group, Social Landlord in Dumfries and Galloway, was successful in securing £560,000 to refurb a number of properties in Upper Nithsdale. That was 20 properties, 7 I believe in Sanquhar and 13 in Kellohome. These are all good to go. 4 I believe are have families at the moment. We're expecting another 3. And at the moment, out with the Ukrainian long-term funding properties, we have 9 families in Upper Nithsdale, and those are both Ukrainian and Afghan families. So very successful, and a real welcoming from the Upper Nithsdale community, I would have to say. With regards to the modular housing, that has been up for discussion for some time. We had hoped to take that forward for Ukrainian guests a number of months ago. However, costs at that time were quite prohibitive. It's not off the table. We're still having discussions, and it is something that we are going to have to maybe have a think about. We are continually looking at how we can encourage our Ukrainian guests to move out with our Welcome Hub accommodation, and obviously we have a number of Ukrainian guests in host accommodation. So it is a huge task. However, we work tirelessly to look at it, and hopefully we will have all these properties that we have filled and are attracting more properties as we speak. So I think that's all for me, Les.
Thank you. And the last work stream then is Kirsty Peden, who covers Welcome Hub's community orientation and support. Thanks.
Good morning. Our work stream has the privilege of supporting those that arrive in our region from the moment they arrive until the end of their resettlement journey. We also support the hosts who support particularly the Ukrainian community, and also we work with many partners across the region at a community level to be able to support their social integration and to just generally help them along their way. In terms of how well our new Scots have settled, I can say that without doubt it's because of the partnership arrangements that we have in place. Our partners include a range of third sector organisations, both nationally and locally across the region, as well as individuals who've welcomed people into their, not just their hearts, but also their homes in terms of particularly the Ukrainian hosts. And we've made available volunteering placements, they've made available social opportunities, cultural celebrations, neighbours, friends. We have seen a huge response from communities across our region, and I think it's something we should be very proud of. I've no doubt our success relies on the partnership approach that we've taken, as you've already heard from the other workstream chairs. All CPP partners contribute to the resettlement journey, to the process that individuals and families go through from their arrival. And we measure that using tools like Outcome Star, and we are aware of the impacts that it's having and are constantly evaluating how effective we are and where the areas we need to improve. We have a short video at the end in a few moments, and I've no doubt that hearing from the New Scots themselves, you will see and hear your own organisations and how you've supported that journey. Our workstream partners receive funding through the resettlement funds that Liz has talked about this morning, and although the last 2 years due to the war in Ukraine has been mainly reactive, we've been responding collectively to their needs. We are now trying to look at the remaining funds longer term, particularly for the third sector partners, where these individuals have made strong links, they've made their homes, and we want to be able to ensure that that integration continues for a long, long time. So that's something that we're about to start looking into in a bit more detail as we go forward.
Thank you. So our next steps, so we have a draft evaluation report. We're looking to hear your thoughts today about any feedback you have about the programme, and we have some staff engagement sessions as well to feed into that final report. And as the covering report says, all the partners will receive a copy of that for your information. The other change that you'll see is proposed in the report is the transfer of the chair of the board over to Charles Rocks. So that's a change from community services over to social work services. And Charles comes to us with experience from another part of Scotland and real enthusiasm and inspiration about moving forward into the next stage. So I think my concluding remarks are it's been a great privilege to chair the board since November 2015, and very grateful to the current board members and their 14 predecessors over 8 years. That's why I've got grey hair. I've been here since the start. But they have, you know, between them given support and safety to over 600 people that have transferred through this resettlement programme. So rightly, the last word is going to be to some of our new Scots, and the interviews and the presentation now are part of a community education degree by one of our resettlement officers, Lauren Asher, who's with us at the end, and Linda Irving is also here, who has supported one of the families who you're going to hear about shortly. We've also got a copy of a booklet that Lauren produced as part of her degree, which we'll give a copy of you to the end, which has very powerful stories from a much wider range of our new Scots. They're extremely inspirational. So I'll see the presentations up on the board, and if we can hand over to Lauren and Linda to take us through it. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for having us along to present this today. Our Journeys is a collation of stories from New Scots across Dumfries and Galloway, and tells their stories of how they've resettled and integrated into our communities. As part of our continual evaluation, we have got stories today from families from Afghanistan, Syria, Pakistan, Poland, Ukraine, Spain, Germany, Jordan and Wales. Most of these families have travelled through countries in order to arrive in Scotland, and that is part of what they will share with you today. On the screen are some words that our families have used to describe the accommodation and welcome they've received in Dumfries and Galloway. These words specifically relate to the Crichton Flats accommodation that was provided as a partnership through the Crichton Trust and the NHS. And as those flats are handed back over to our NHS colleagues, these were the words that families used to describe their time in that accommodation. handing over to our new Scots directly, our first journey comes from a family who resettled here fairly recently from Afghanistan. They have achieved a huge amount in the short time that they have been here and are engaging in weekly ESOL classes, volunteering with a local third sector organisation, and are part of the local faith community. All of their school-age children are attending schools and have settled in very smoothly. In their own words and language, here is our first journey.
موږ دلته په د اتمې میاشتې 15 تاریخ د ویلف نه د کارډیف ښار نه دلته کوچکشي وکړه د کیفټرون هوټل په نام هوټل و نو اگر چې موږ هوټلو کې ډېر تنګ شوي موږ پاکستان کې هم ډېر وخت هوټل کې تېر کړو دلته نو بیا چې کله موږ ته کور واوته دلته راغلو نو موږ چې څومره فکر کولو تصور مو کولو د نه زیات موږ ته د هرکلی وکړلو د موږ استقبال یې وکړو موږ موقت کور ته راغلو د یوې میاشتې لپاره نو د موږ زیات استقبال وشو څومره تصور چې موږ کولو د نه زیات و د دی هرکلی د موږ لپاره د دی قدردانۍ موږ د دی ټیم نه ډېر خوشحاله یو خصوصا د دغې ګورنمنټ نه موږ چې هغې ځای نه راتلو نو موږ سره د یو تشویش ډېر راسره و چې د موږ کور والا مریضه وه د موږ ماشوم د پیدا کېدو ته کم ټیم پاتې و نو اگر چې د لارې سفر ته هم ډېر خوابدي و چې دا به څنګه رسېږو لار کې کوم خطر راته پیدا نه شي نو بیا چې یو موقت کور کې و هلته هم ډېر خفه و یو خو د خلکو سره نه و بلد یو د شبخانو ژبه مو نه وزده نو ډېر تشویش و سرخوږی ورته موږ وی چې که داسې وخت کې د موږ ته مریضي پیدا شي نو موږ سپټ ورکر ته هم لاسرسی نه لرو کلینیک ته نو بیا شاید خدای په خیر وکړل نو موږ چې کله د دایمي کور ته راغلو د نوې میاشتې په 15 تاریخ راغلو نو په 14 تاریخ د سهار 10 بجې خواوشا 9 بجې ټیم و چې د موږ کور کې والاته د ماشومانو تکلیف پیدا شو نو موږ امبولانس ته زنګ ووهلو شبخانې ته چې لاړو نو د موږ ماشومې تقریبا 11 بجې په شبخانه کې تولد وشو نو موږ دا هم یو زیات ټینشن وکنه چې دا مریضي به څنګه شي ځکه افغانستان کې ډېر My name is Nurullah Noori. My from Afghanistan.
My name is Kabel Noori.
My baby Zainab Noori.
Our next journey is told by Noor. Noor's family arrived nearly 5 years ago from Syria. Her husband Fayaz and her 3 sons have settled well into life in Annan alongside Noor. They're very active within the local community, attending football, taekwondo, youth work and accessing many other opportunities. Fayaz works full-time and he's now a fierce advocate for the benefits Annan has to offer families. In her own words, here's Noor's journey.
السلام عليكم أنا اسمي نور جيت لهون على بريطانيا بال2019 وأول ما إجينا على بريطانيا تلقينا كثير مساعدات الحمد لله من الكانسل ومن الأطباء ومن الترجمة ما قصروا معنا وكل شيء ممتاز الأولاد بالمدارس الحمد لله وعيشة حلوة وأنا الآن متطوعة بالكيدز كيتشن مع 6 أوكرانية وأنا مبسوطة كثير بهذا التطوع وإني حابة إني أساعد الناس في الأشياء الحلوة وإني أساهم في هذا البلد.
Living with a host in Dumfries. They've been living here for 2 years now and are well integrated into the local community. They've adapted well to life in Dumfries, regularly utilising local leisure facilities and public transport to further their education. Here's their journey.
Привіт, мене звати Інна і я з України. В Шотландії я через початок війни. Дуже складна ситуація. Я працюю зараз в Аннані Я повар, змінила свою українську професію, але основною метою мого перебування тут є мій син. Син закінчив школу завдяки шотландському уряду. І я дуже вдячна. Зараз він навчається в коледжі і має далі вчитися в університеті. Я дуже вдячна Шотландії за таку можливість, за прекрасних людей, з якими я познайомилася, за волонтерів, за Kate's Kitchen. Ці люди допомогли мені знайти себе.
Is told by Marina and Olena. Both women have travelled through various countries to get to Scotland and have overcome significant challenges to be where they are today. They've embedded themselves within many local organisations and groups and are actively giving back to the community who have welcomed them. Molina is the project worker for Annan Harbour Action Group. Here's their journeys.
Hello, my name is Marina. I'm from Ukraine and I'm almost 44. And I would like to say a big thank you for everyone who supports me here. And I'm living now currently in Scotland, in Annan, Dumfries and Galloway. And I would like to say I really appreciate all help from the settlement team. And because of the beautiful people, now I'm a part of the team in Dumfries and Galloway Disability Sport. I'm a part of Botscha team. And soon I will be participant in a competition in Dundee. So I'm very happy to be there and finally to find my own way. Because in Ukraine I was unable to do any sports because we had this medical model of disability. Here in Scotland I can do whatever I want and I'm really happy to be there.
Hello, my name is Olena and I would like to share the experience of our family here in Scotland. It was quite diverse, but at every stage of it we have got a great support of the resettlement team, of the community, NHS and different systems. Because when we came here 2 years ago, we were met by our host family. Then we were transferred to the hotel. Then we have got housing, council housing, and moved here. Then our parents passed away, and at every stage we have got a good support. I would like to mention also that the way of our journey and our journey was not always pleasant. It was challenging and it was difficult. Only for now, 2 years have passed and I feel that I'm here. I feel the life and it was because of support we have got.
Due to time, we've only been able to share a snapshot of the experiences of our resettled families, but like Liz said earlier, they would love to join you for some of them a bite to eat afterwards.
Thank you very much, Liz, and all your team, and thank you for all those people who've contributed to that presentation. Really, really heartwarming, and it's good to see the impact you have on real people's lives. Very helpful. Does anybody have any questions to Liz and her team? Alan.
Thank you, and first of all to recognise the tremendous work. I think if ever we needed an example of good partnership working to meet the needs of fellow humans, then here it is in the resettlement programme. So thank you to everyone who's contributed and to all those who've been willing to share their story as well, which is not always an easy thing to do. Two areas probably more of interest here for anything else. One is a lot of focus around settlement and around finding places for people to be able to integrate. But I'm interested either from Kirsty or from Anne's perspective, both from a language and culture perspective about the responsiveness of communities and maybe the opportunities that have been created for people who are new Scots or guests here to find people with similar interests and similar cultures and values to be able to to be able to socialise, I suppose, more than anything else, and find a sense of safety that's not just about integrating into kind of Scotland. And I know work's been done on that, so it'd be interesting to hear on that. And second, a particular area that I think the group's been silent on, but I'm curious about, is around transport and connectivity. If you are from Dumfries and Galloway, you'll be familiar with the complexities we have here, but I'm wondering whether any of our guests or New Scots have raised issues around opportunities to explore and what some of the challenges around transport and connectivity have been for them too. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. I'll ask Kirsty to pick up the issues about integration, and Anne can probably talk a bit about the transport and how we've overcome these challenges in terms of accessing education and employment. Thanks.
Thanks. Our initial evaluation does recognise that there is a tendency, or it's easier and faster to be able to socialise within a particular community generally. So the Ukrainians perhaps did stick with Ukrainians, Syrians probably similarly. However, we have acknowledged that and are finding ways using resettlement funds and community organisations in the main to be able to support that where it's their neighbours and their own communities that they're socialising and integrating with more generally. It does take time, and so we do see that it does expand, and particularly with the families with children. Where there's children, I would say that it's much more integrated socially into their community activities. But I think the families where there's adults only find that possibly harder. There are other examples, however, where, particularly within the Syrian community, for example, where they actually haven't wanted to engage with the wider Syrian community, and they've absolutely wanted to just to go from day one to be Scottish, and not to stay with their kind of the wider resettled community. So we've got a variety of differences. The other joy I would probably share is because of the number of hosts that came forward across our region, from Stranraer to Gretna to Sankar, across, because within smaller communities there were small pockets, mainly of Ukrainians, they have integrated into their communities much faster and much easier. It's actually in the larger towns where we probably see that needs maybe a bit more help.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. Thank you, Alan. Just in terms of transport and connecting people, it has been a challenge. It's not been easy, and we do live in a rural community, which can be difficult at times. I have to say, we've overcome a lot of it through partnership working, through our connections with schools, local nurseries, through third sector organisations that have been absolutely crucial in helping out. I think the model that has been developed, one single service or two services working together, just absolutely could not have done it. We've had to arrange things like bus passes and things for people to get into sort of ESOL classes or schools or things like that. But we've absolutely done it through a partnership approach and overcame that. I think in terms of just, obviously we've got some resettled guests that are in very rural communities, and it's not maybe always easy to get into an adult learning ESOL class in the middle of Dumfries, etc. So we've worked really hard at getting digital devices in place, and I have to say we've had some fantastic support from Connecting Scotland to get devices in place so that everybody is, if they're not able to get there face to face, they're getting that digital connection and they're able to sort of join online in a sort of hybrid approach. So yeah, it's not been easy. We've had challenges, but a lot of positives out of it. Thank you.
The ability of your driving certificates. Bicycles, Mool have been great at procuring and giving out bicycles and cycling proficiency tests, etc. So there is a sort of a very whichever and however we've been able to do it. But I can maybe bring Kirsty in as well, just to touch on the hosts as well.
just to mention that as well as their hearts, their homes, they've often given up their cars. You know, people that are hosted in the smaller communities are generally driving, either initially with their host cars quite often, legally, but also then definitely legally, but also using then being able to basically, you know, buy their own cars because their licenses transfer. So I would say the vast majority of our resettled community across Syrians, Ukrainians and indeed Afghans, and given the time, are quick to drive for employment, and some are using that as a route to employment.
Okay, Joe and then Dawn.
I really just want to say we've hosted a Ukrainian guest for the last 20 months, and I just wanted to thank the resettlement team. We've always had responses from both social work and from the NHS, which has been particularly flexible and supportive of our guests, so I do think it's a credit to all of you.
And Dawn.
Thank you, and thank you, Liz and team, for the presentation and the insights. It's been a fantastic, really uplifting presentation, so thank you for that, and thank you for the incredible work that's been ongoing for many years, much of which goes unseen because it's very focused and diligent work with our New Scots. So that's really, really positive. And I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you to Liz for chairing that work, leading that work so well for the last number of years. And I was pleased, Kirsty, when you talked about hosts, and obviously Joe has that experience. And I just wonder, you know, those personal stories that we've heard today are so powerful, aren't they? And I just wondered whether there's an opportunity to capture the stories of hosts and capture the stories of schools where they've welcomed children into their school environment, and the real richness that has brought to people's lives, either as a host, a school, or community organisations where, with the involvement of people who've arrived here, they've felt, you know, that it's really benefited them. So is there an opportunity to capture some of those stories as well? Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Very pertinent as we're putting together our evaluation report. We have done a mixture of sort of quantitative, you know, we've done surveys of people, hosts and others, but we have tried to capture some of that through case studies. And it is very much an ongoing a journey for us as well as our New Scots, because there are some amazing stories coming at our next newsletter. I think we were just talking about, we'll feature some of the prize-giving successes that our New Scots have had in schools. We were just talking about that before we came in. So you're right, it's so important to capture the human element of this, because that was why most of the partners got into this in the first place. It's about the humanitarian response to dreadful things that are happening throughout the world. So I think that's really helpful, just to we'll make sure that the evaluation report has got that depth of information in it. Thank you.
If I can give a final comment if possible. Thank you very much, Liz, for your chairing of the group, and for all the participants in the presentation today. And we need to acknowledge Charles Rock's future involvement in chairing that group, so I think the CPP can recognise that. You did mention the evaluation work, and in the spirit of what you're going to bring forward in terms of evaluation, the only comment I had was, clearly within the presentation there's been some variation depending on the resettlement group in terms of their ability to settle and engagement to employment and all those other sorts of things. And I think it'd be useful if the evaluation material tried to draw out what it is you believe has started to impact on those variations. And some of that will be about the communities themselves, clearly, but some will be about what we do in terms of policy, etc. So if there's a chance to do that and then to suggest mitigations that might be brought on board, because clearly every New Scot should be given the opportunity to thrive equally. We want to make sure that that's an opportunity for everybody equally. So. And John, final comment on this item.
Yeah, well, first comment is Councillor McFarlane, Councillor Ferguson are struggling to join, but Councillor McFarlane's managed to get on with his iPhone, but I think it's Microsoft that's playing up on the iPad and laptops. Yeah, just a quick one, if I may. And I'm pleased to see that modular housing has not been taken off the table. However, there was mention about the costs are a concern. I mean, these modular buildings, they won't come cheap, I would imagine. So I don't know what's the action plan for driving that forward, if anything. Thanks, Chair.
We're still just at the stage of discussion because clearly, you know, there is a housing emergency, you know, nationwide, and we need to start thinking very creatively. We're not, unfortunately, meeting our dispersal numbers in terms of asylum. We're struggling to get private lets because obviously the cost of living crisis, rents are, you know, quite high at the moment as well. So we have to have these conversations. So it's early days, but it actually was very successful when it was looked at for the Ukrainian community at the time. And we need to be having these conversations. So early days, but it's definitely, it's on plan.
Thanks, John. And final comment then from John Duggan.
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I think I want to get across with colleagues that how heartening it is to hear that Dumfries and Galloway are doing things so much differently and doing it with compassion for these 600 people that's been involved in the work. Not only are 600 people benefiting for the what's going on in Dumfries and Galloway, but our communities are also benefiting. And we've heard commonality today that there has been lots of third sector involvement and volunteering opportunities and people going on to employment. And I think that's really heartening, and I think we should be celebrating that in wider, and that we should be asking colleagues across the country to actually watch what we're doing differently, and the language that we're using is very different to that of others. Just one question, I wonder how Dumfries and Galloway is compared to other local authorities in the work that we're doing, and are people learning from us?
So we are very connected at national level, as I'm sure you would expect, and part of the evaluation work is benchmarking with other areas. We participate in the COSLA Resettlement Liaison Group, which has also been in place for about 8 years, and that is where we do discuss not only operational issues but approaches. And you are correct that our model has been very much one about community focus. There are other areas where it's perhaps been more of a housing officer or a social work officer model. They've also been successful, but it's perhaps just a different approach for a predominantly rural area, which I think has served us well in that model. So I think it is a case of different models for different places and perhaps also different times, because as we are moving forward, the number of Syrian and Ukrainian guests will be reducing, but as Jan referenced, the asylum seeker dispersal is also increasing. So I think that's where the link with social work will be particularly helpful, because as the balance of the resettlement board and programme changes, we need to adapt to make sure we keep the benefits of the community model but recognising responsibilities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't really have any time for any further questions, I'm afraid, but can I thank you on behalf of the CPP for your presentation and to all your colleagues, and pass on our thanks to everybody else that's working behind the scenes. Can I just recognise the people online? I may be not being as fair to you as I am to the people sitting here, and recognising that you want to come in, so apologies for that. I'll try and keep an eye on the hands that come up on screen too, going forward. The next item on the agenda is the LOIP. Stephen and Val, I think are going to give us an update on how we're going with the LOIP action plan.
Yep, thanks, Chair. This has really been the main focus of the senior leadership team for the last few months. So really there's 5 component parts here just really for endorsement, and they've been worked through with partners. Appendix 1, you have the suite of Pintana project templates, which Valerie mentioned earlier on, covering the various themes and actions that we want to take forward. Preliminary work has already started on that behind the scenes with partners, so those are for endorsement today, just to rubber stamp those. We also have the proposal, a worked up proposal on the locality plans and how we're taking that forward with a template for agreement, along with an associated timeline. Appendix C, we have the draft performance management framework for 23-24. And that's been, again, worked up with partners. We've had input from Public Health Scotland, looking at the range of indicators that's available, and they're also working on historical trends to support that. You know, this will continue to evolve over the coming years, and again, it's for endorsement, so we can start pulling that information together to present that in November and December later in the year. Appendix 4, we had received a request from the locality hubs who are keen to develop a data sharing agreement. Leadership team agreed that, so again, that's for endorsement today. And as we previously agreed, there's a case study example of the work of the hubs also in Appendix 4. And finally, a previous board request was to create a community planning handbook, which included a bit more detail about the workings of the various partnerships that contribute to our model. And that's now available in Appendix 5. So happy to take any questions along with Valerie as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't know if Val wants to come in offer any additional comment, but we can go straight into questions. Val, do you want to go in?
Yeah, I suppose as Stephen's saying, the focus really has been on the LOIP action plan that was agreed here, and actually how we move into delivery of that. So that's why we've looked at how's the best approach to kind of make sure that we make those projects happen and use the Pantana templates to keep focus. And as a senior leadership team, we will be kind of getting regular updates on those and identifying any barriers to the progress around about them. I think we've had a lot of conversation about outcomes and how do we know if things are getting better. So having a really robust performance framework is really, really important. So it's always easier said than done to pull these things together. But I think one of the things we've got to kind of bear in mind is we have a hugely complex landscape that we are trying to deal with and make changes in. So actually looking at long-term trends is going to be important, but also what are the kind of short and medium-term things that we can get assurance that we're on the right journey. So really do welcome, as a senior leadership team, challenge and feedback so that we can actually really focus and deliver for you as a board on these items that we're bringing forward today. So thanks.
Thank you, Val. Any comments? I'll start if that's okay, if anybody else wants to come in. I welcome the paper, a really helpful paper, and I do endorse the use of the Pantana templates and things like that. They look very helpful. My initial thoughts when I started to read through them, and so this is a bit of a challenge, was the first couple are clearly about understanding our position relative to the challenge, and I can understand why you'd need to do that work, and I think you're hoping to do that before the end of 2024, so that in the future years, the LOIP, you start to develop some actions. But clearly towards the latter half of these actions, there were already identified actions that you tried to develop, which I thought was really helpful. There's a link to the performance frame, which I fully support as well. And I think there's a link to the conversation we had earlier about poverty. Val, I think it was you brought up employability amongst others. The issue for me is how do we measure our organisation's commitments to that particular position? So how do we demonstrate each organisation, each partner around the table? How do we demonstrate our commitment to things like our impact on the increased employability of disadvantaged groups, people with mental health problems, ALD, people from alcohol and drug backgrounds, those sorts of things. And I think we really need to challenge that if we're going to make the best use of our local human resources at a time when we know our population is declining. So that was something I wasn't quite sure about, but if that can be picked up in the sort of future years of the LOIP plan, it'd be really helpful for me. Any other comments on the LOIP? Alan?
Thanks, Sherry. Maybe to pick up on that particular point, I think it's important, and it has been a discussion at the senior leadership team when we were developing, I think, some of the content for the plans, that what we can't have is just a collection of individual organisations' work. The whole purpose of the planning is about our joint commitments to the outcomes that we want to do, and what we can't end up is with a long list of 25, 30 individual projects recognised. So even though some of our colleagues are leading, and I think we do have this conversation at SLT, that some of our organisations are leading just because of where they, I guess, fit within the landscape, it doesn't stop contributions from across the partnership. And I think there's still work to do on that around how we recognise that involvement, to your point, and I think you've made it a couple of times now about recognising the kind of collective action and using all of our resources. We're in really difficult times, but we have a wide range of resources across all of our partners, and I guess there's a bit of an onus on us at board and practically, operationally at SLT to make sure we're making the best use of those. But I just wanted to acknowledge your point that the last thing we need is a collection of individual organisations' activities and wrapping them up with a kind of community planable, because I don't think anyone wins out of that model.
Thank you, Alan. Any other comments? Okay, can I thank you both, Val and Stephen, for your work on the LOIP and for the work within the SLT to bring the action planning to life. I feel it's significantly progressed from previous LOIPs, and commend you for the work you've done on it. So thank you very much. We're almost back on time. In fact, we're ahead of time. Fantastic chairing. Updates on key plans and strategies. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. The leadership team were conscious on reducing the burden on the leads that have to produce the information quarterly. So the request was to try and keep these as succinct as possible. So really, the only one I really wanted to focus on this time round was in terms of the CLD progress visit, which I think everyone in the room is aware of. And we found out yesterday that the last, and that's really starting on page 138 of the report. So Education Scotland have now completed the 32 visits, and the Dumfries and Galloway visit was in January, but the report was only published in March, and that's when we got the final version. So, I mean, it's a really good news story for how community planning partners work together. You don't get much notice for these type of things, and every single partner really stepped up, and it was particularly over the pre-Christmas and early January to contribute to the programme, produce evidence, case studies, and contribute really positively to the conversations with the inspectors. And I think that showed the really strength of the partnership working, and that shone through in the findings itself. I mean, again, really strong messages around strategic leadership across all aspects of CLD, third sector, council, all partners, the use of data and research, the support and impacts of volunteering came across really strong, and they could really see how resources were being combined and targeted at those in most need. Now, Dumfries and Galloway also received identified three areas of best practice for sharing nationally, and that was the youth work progression pathway, which to have in place from a young person through to volunteering, through to employment, etc. The mental health in schools project, and also the approach to community asset transfers, which has been really successful in Dumfries and Galloway. So what I found out yesterday was that there was 21 areas of best practice identified nationally. That's from across the board. So 3 of those came from Dumfries and Galloway, and only one other local authority also had 3. So you take that out, and it shows that there's a lot of strength there. So linked to that, Dumfries and Galloway also received the highest confidence statement that you could out of this visit. I know from the information yesterday, just short of a quarter of local authorities are requiring to either have a bit of a return visit or provide additional information. So, I think we're in a really strong position to move forward. So linked to that, the National Independent Review of CLD is just coming to a close, and we're waiting to hear the findings of that. So again, as part of the endorsement, there's an interim action plan which will be taken forward through the CLD partnership, which will cover 24-25, and that will dovetail in with the timeline and the consultation mandate to take some deeper engagement consultation, take into account the findings from the National Review, with a view to getting a more thorough, detailed plan produced by September next year. So thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions to Stephen? John?
Yeah, thank you. Stephen, I suppose the question is, what are we going to do to promote this excellent piece of work? If you're highlighting lots of achievements, and I think that's really right, that we should be, as partners now, working out what's the next step to make sure that our communities in Dumfries and Galloway actually know what's been happening and how external inspectors have actually reached their conclusions.
No, thanks, John. Good question. So we've got a press release ready to go. Get the messages out on social media now. It went to the Councillors Communities Committee earlier in the week. So now that we've got the board pass, we can really start to get that communication out. What we did do was there's a more detailed report that you get that's not for public sharing, but we've taken the key messages out of that and shared that individually with partners as well. So we can certainly get the campaign enrolling next week, John. Thank you.
Any other questions to Stephen? Any online? Okay, well, thank you very much for that update, Stephen. That's a very helpful summary of all the positions taken on by the partners in their plans. Next item is Scottish Fire and Rescue presentation. Now, Scott, you're attending on behalf of Andrew, who couldn't attend it today, so welcome to the CPP, and over to yourself.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the welcome. As you mentioned, I'm here on behalf of the LSO, Andrew Kenna, to deliver a presentation on shaping the future of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Obviously, this isn't a full consultation. This is merely a pre-consultation, so for information of members. Obviously, with the general election, any full consultation will be after the election. So, on that basis, and the introduction there, you can see the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are obviously looking to modernise itself, and obviously taking account of the challenges that face Scotland's future. Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are a proud heritage of looking after and protecting the communities of Scotland, and obviously there's a recognition that the risk profile across Scotland is changing, and we want to do more to meet the demands that we face. So we see there that we talk about doing more for the communities by responding to incidents and stopping them from happening. So a key part of our work is obviously around prevention, but obviously working with partners and looking at how we can best use our resources to meet that prevention and protection agenda. To allow us to do that, we obviously need to make sure that we have the right resources in the right places at the right time. So you'll appreciate that our current model of fire stations is a historic one, and that is obviously based primarily on heavy industry and where the risk was many years ago. Industry, employment, work, all those factors have changed over a number of years. So we need to probably a piece of work to realign and make sure that we have the right resources in the right places based on the risk that we face now and in the future. Part of that obviously takes in the fact that, like I mentioned, we have an old estate. So a lot of that obviously estate is ageing and needs to be invested in and obviously repaired. So there's work around doing that. So you'll see there on the right hand side what we need to do. We're looking obviously for this pre-consultation is obviously just to engage with yourselves, our communities, our staff, and get your opinion on what you see and what you expect for your fire service in the future. And so we need your views on what your Scottish Fire and Rescue Service should look like as we move forward, and that will help inform after the summer the options for change that will get put forward for the full public consultation. So where we are now, we're currently in the phase of what's called the Strategic Service Review Programme, SSRP as it's referred to, and members will probably be aware of the decision that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service made last year to temporarily withdraw 10 whole-time appliances from circulation. Those appliances that are still currently have been withdrawn, and obviously on a temporary basis, but obviously we need to look at what that will mean for us as we move beyond 2024 and into 2025. Like I said, that is still a temporary position. Any decision on that would have to go through full public consultation. So we are obviously doing this presentation, and part of the presentation is to encourage members and communities to go on and participate in the online survey. The survey opened at the start of May and runs for 2 months, and will close at the end of June, the 30th of June. So we would encourage everybody to take the opportunity to have your say and fill out the survey. It needs to capture your views. And again, just a very basic timeline there. So like I say, the pre-consultation started in April and runs to the end of June. Obviously, over the summer, that will give us the time to gather the feedback from the survey and create those options for change, which will be then presented at the back end of the year for a full public consultation. So a wee bit more detail about why we need to change. So you'll see in the figures there, I talked about just earlier, Scotland is changing and we need to respond to different types of incidents. So some headline figures there, you'll see over the last kind of 20 years, fires are down over 56%. Having said that, fires still remain one of our largest type of activity, albeit it's reduced significantly over the last 20 years. As a result, consequently, house fires have also reduced. They're down 47% over the 20-year period. And we've also seen a reduction in fatalities and injuries related to domestic fires and property fires. So the prevention work that we're currently involved in has had a significant impact in driving down those figures. You'll see there other building fires are also down as well. They're over 55% over the last 10 years. But our climate and obviously our world is changing, and we are seeing an impact in other areas. So you'll appreciate outdoor fires, you'll see there are up 5% over the last 10 years. We're also seeing the effects of climate change. We're seeing an increase in flooding as well over the last kind of 5 years, 10 years. You'll also notice there that non-fire related incidents. So this is everything else that is not fire. So that's everything from road traffic collisions, assisting other agencies, hazmat incidents, radiological incidents, everything like that, flooding, inland water. So we are seeing an increase in non-fire related activity. So as our environment and climate changes, so does our response. So a wee bit more data there in terms of wildfires. You'll see there since 2010, Scotland has approximately 2,500 wildfires. So in terms of a wildfire, we would class a wildfire as a fire involving over 1,000 square metres. And since 2018, we've had 8 wildfires that have lasted more than 5 days. So you can appreciate that has a significant demand and a draw on resources, not just in terms of local level, but also national, pulling in national assets from across other parts of Scotland to deal with these types of incidents. You'll see there about 15,000 flooding incidents attended since 2013 and 14, so over the last 10 years. And obviously, if you think back to last year, we had Storm Babette, which obviously with a number of fatalities in North East Scotland, had a significant draw on resources, like I say, for the service, pulling in specialist water assets from across Scotland to help deal with response in the northeast of Scotland. So part of this work is obviously, like I touched on earlier, is matching the resources to risk. So we've spent years looking at community risk and changing risk. So we use a process called the Community Risk Index Management Model, which takes data, historical incident data, population data, census data, and we use all that information to look at and try and make some predictions on where the activity and where our response is going to be. So we use this information, and what it's identified is that, like I said, some of our stations are probably not in the best place historically. They will probably be based around places where we had heavy industry, lots of activity. That industry has declined, and as a result, we probably still have a response model that is based on that previous data. So there is some recognition that there's probably an opportunity that some of those stations could be changed or redistributed to more appropriate places where the risk is present now. So our knowledge of risk will obviously help inform where we need to locate these stations, obviously, and how we crew our appliances and how we operate from stations. As you'll appreciate, down here in D&G, we're predominantly on-call station. We only have one whole-time station, and that's replicated across large parts of Scotland. Over 50% of our staff are actually on call. So we have some significant challenges across the area, across the whole of Scotland. But the service obviously recognises that it's people, the success that we talk about is obviously is down to the people that we employ. So there's a key focus for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to make sure that we have the right staff in the right place with the right training and quality training to deliver on our objectives and our agenda moving forward. There's a key there to obviously invest in more training sites and more instructors to make sure that as our changing risk profile develops, that we have the right people, the right staff with the training to deliver that training to our staff across the whole of Scotland. So that requires investment to allow that to happen. And obviously the key focus for the service is obviously to make a more representative of our communities. It's something that the service is very passionate about. we understand the benefit and the value of having a diverse workforce to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our communities across Scotland. So it's a key focus for the service as we move forward through this process to keep that as a key area for development. And obviously we want to do more to support our on-call firefighters. Like I've mentioned, over 50% of our staff are made up of on-call. So we have significant challenges and stuff we've talked about this morning in terms of employability, access. The on-call model relies on people living and working in the local community. And we have some significant challenges in this area in terms of employability and keeping people in local communities, because we need those people if we need them as employees. So some real challenges. And obviously, once we've identified people, it's obviously keeping them, retaining them, having that retention of staff. We lose out, we invest heavily in people, train them up, and then obviously retain them. We are, unfortunately, suffer retention issues. So one of the issues that comes along when we look at our historic portfolio of assets is that our estate are ageing. So lots of our estate, like I say, are in legacy locations. I've been there for a number of years. So we have a significant ageing profile in terms of requiring urgent action and investment. And you'll see there, we need 60 million each year to bring our buildings, equipment and standards up to state, up to a reasonable standard. Within that, you'll see there that there's 14 stations that have been identified as having reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC as it's more commonly known. We have taken actions to mitigate that. We obviously, those stations are still operational, but we need to look at how we deal with that long term. We have 356 sites across Scotland, and you'll see there that the standard and quality of services in those properties varies greatly. So some don't have dignified facilities, some don't have IT infrastructure and stuff like that. So there's a significant piece of work there to bring all those assets up to a reasonable standard. And obviously the service recognises that doing nothing is not an option. We have a responsibility to make sure that we have dignified and appropriate facilities for all our staff. In line with that, obviously one of the key factors we're looking at when investing in our property is about the contamination risk to firefighters. The service has done a lot of work with our union colleagues and other partners in terms of research, and you'll see there in the highlight figure that the research has concluded that firefighters are 1.6 times higher than the general public to mortality from forms of cancer. So that's a significant risk, and so the service is obviously taking action to mitigate that. In the short term, we have taken steps to provide decontamination wipes to all crews. So at incidents, the crews can decontaminate using the wipes. We have a process for bagging and securing contaminated equipment. They're doing working stations to identify clean and dirty zones, so having zoned areas in stations. But you'll appreciate, because of the complexities of our state, that's more achievable in some stations than it is in others. So there's a significant investment required to do this work to obviously meet the risks posed from firefighter contamination to cancer. What changes could we make? So you'll see there the areas we could change. We're looking at developing the role of the firefighter. So that's about expanding the role of the firefighter. So talking there about, obviously, we do a lot of prevention work there. But obviously looking to do even more prevention work. What can we do to mitigate, pressure and demand for our service, but not just our services, but our partner services as well. Is there more? Can we take, we have an ageing population in Scotland, more people living at home, so requiring, can we use technology, can we use, more prevention activities to reduce the demand for services for people living in their homes. Changing where our stations, we've obviously touched on that, and making sure that the appliances are based in the best location, based on the risk data. Changing how and when we staff our resources. So again, we have a number of different models of staffing that we use within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. We also have whole-time firefighters who work a 5-watch duty system, so they provide 24-hour cover 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Thereafter, it's their on-call colleagues, and after that, we also have volunteer units and community response vehicles who are across Scotland in some of the remote areas and islands across Scotland. So we have a blended approach to responding to incidents. Changing how we attend emergencies. So again, that can be looking at, obviously there's different options for responding to emergencies, and that's about the number of people. So could we use a blended approach, for example, using whole-time colleagues to support on-call stations, or vice versa, could use an on-call colleague to support a whole-time station if there's a shortfall. So looking at how we use staff and how we respond to emergencies. Work has obviously been undertaken just now regarding the rationalising of corporate buildings. So our headquarters in Hamilton is up for sale. So the service are actively looking at opportunities to rationalise some of its corporate portfolio, because they realise there is potential to release some capital there, which could then be reinvested into other areas of the service. And a wee bit more there in developing the role of firefighter. So we'll see that we want to be a leader in public services. So we could work with our public service partners to take on more prevention work, provide additional support to vulnerable people in our communities, so through that prevention work, and obviously supporting our partners, so in our emergency response activities, taking some of that pressure off other colleagues. To achieve this, well, obviously that would need to be discussed and agreed with our union colleagues through negotiation, but that would also require a change in any contract. So that's obviously, and the service is working closely with the FBU in terms of that broader role of a firefighter, and they have an agreement in principle, but obviously that would be subject to agreement with a union colleagues in the changing contract. So I've already kind of touched on this, but you can see there on the left-hand side, this is what it would allow. So the headline figure there of £1 million a year for one whole-time fire appliance crew 24/7 is the kind of figure to run a single pump station. There is an opportunity to reinvest money that we realise from leasing corporate buildings and stuff like that, and allow us to invest in resources. Look at obviously those stations where we can maybe close stations, or stations are too close together, look to amalgamate stations potentially, and obviously use that capital to reinvest in other areas and allow stations that are fit for purpose, modern, with dignified facilities and appropriate for our staff. So, touched on that very briefly before. Like I say, we have a 5-watch duty system there, and with the 3 types of models. Currently, there's an opportunity to mix duty systems. This is common elsewhere in the UK. It doesn't really happen in Scotland at the moment, but it is recognised by other fire authorities within the UK that a blended approach to using different duty systems to allow that response to happen is a potential option. We could change the duty systems to meet risk and demand. So obviously you'll appreciate our operational activities predominantly between the hours of kind of 8 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock at night is our peak period for operational activity. After that time frame, our operational activity reduces. So there's potential for looking at a more appropriate and bespoke response model that matches the demand with cover. So you see that it talks about whole-time firefighters during the day for that peak time activity, and on-call firefighters at night for the times when there's less operational activity. This would allow for staff to be deployed to other areas such as prevention work, training, and meeting some of those other objectives we're trying to achieve. So we've talked about this, but changing how we attend emergencies. So a crew model is the number of firefighters in an appliance that attend an emergency. For that, generally, we're looking at a crew of 5 firefighters that will attend an incident, but the minimum that we use in Scotland would be a crew of 4. So again, where we have potential shortfalls, it may be there's an opportunity to use staff from other duty systems to support that shortfall on a temporary basis. You'll see there in the picture on the right-hand side, that's our West Service Delivery Area Headquarters at Hamilton that I talked about. This is obviously, it's closed, it's up for sale, so there's potential capital savings to be made through the rationalisation of those properties. So, summary of the next steps. Scotland is changing, the risk profile is changing, our environment is changing, and that's having an impact on us and how we respond to incidents. You'll see at the start of the presentation, our traditional fires have reduced significantly. Whilst they still remain a significant proportion of our work, they have significantly reduced. So that, we would appreciate your views on what you see in terms of your needs for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, not just now, but for the years to come. Hopefully this information has been beneficial. I'm happy to take any questions, and you'll see there's an email address for the online survey. The survey is available, and we do have access to other formats, so if the survey is required in Braille or other languages, we have access to that as well. So I'm happy to take questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. John.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Scott, for your presentation. The first two things that come to my mind is the increase in the wildfires incidents. Obviously, we live in a rural area, and they tend to be in these sort of areas. I'm just picking up on the point of the temporary removal of the 10 appliances. How does that affect a rural area as opposed to, you know, a more urban area, especially when there's an increase of wildfires? Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for the question. Just to confirm, when we talk about the withdrawal of 10 appliances, those were appliances that were either the third or second appliance to an incident. So they were predominantly, the stations involved were predominantly in the Central Belt. So that temporary withdrawal had no impact for us in D&G. So obviously in terms of the response that we would have to a wildfire down here, there's no immediate response. But in terms of large-scale incidents, where you have a large-scale incident like a wildfire, we would obviously, the initial responses from the crews within the local area, depending on the scale and the length of time that incident is likely to involve, we would require and we would ask for additional resources from further afield. So, you know, we call in resources from Ayrshire, Lanarkshire, further afield for any, and that's the case for any large-scale major incident. But to answer your question, it has no impact for us locally in D&G at this moment in time, because like I say, that was a temporary withdrawal, and that was around about the Central Belt, where we have lots of stations in a small geographic location based on the kind of the historical data and the industry that was in those areas. The modelling that was done identified that these 10 appliances would have the least impact in terms of, you know, affecting response to incidents across that area. So that's why they were nominated.
Okay, just before we get into further questions, I'm going to bring Julie in a minute. We've got to remember, I think I said at the beginning, we're still going through the UK PERDA position for the, so we've got to be careful about what we're making commitments to here. I recognise this is a consultation process, and that's going to be run for some considerable period of time yet. So in the comments we're making today, can we just make sure that we're not being fixed on the particular outcome that we're looking for? What we're actually encouraging is a full and open consultation. Is that okay? Julie.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for the presentation, Scott. It was really helpful. I suppose I just wanted to acknowledge, I think it is important, and you've highlighted it in the presentation, I think, you know, for throughout this consultation period, to highlight that important role that Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have in that prevention and early intervention space. And I think that's something that, as you're developing that strategy moving forward, I think in particular focusing on individuals' safety, health, well-being within their homes, etc., is a really valuable role, I think, that we shouldn't lose. And I think it's often one that might be lost, and I think that opportunity for that wider contribution of Scottish Fire and Rescue Service with other partners supporting those vulnerable people in their own homes is one that I would absolutely welcome. I was just going to highlight, though, I think as you're going through the consultation, and you talked about those development of those options for change potentially in terms of, and I know that you've highlighted that some of these immediate actions haven't impacted necessarily D&G right away, but I was just thoughtful, Scott, about the opportunity potentially for us to do a bit more of that kind of place-based planning across our public services, because many of us are engaging in community engagement consultations around future models of care, and a lot of the challenges that you've described are common to all of us in terms of that availability of resources, staff, and needing to change our models, the levels of risk changing, the level of demand changing. And I'm just thoughtful that we can all often go out and do these consultations as individual organisations, and there is a potentially an opportunity, I think, through the likes of our community planning processes for us to really use some of these opportunities to develop that place-based planning and that kind of multi-agency approach to our engagement exercises. So just some comments more than anything, Scott. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I'd echo use of things like corporate resources, all those sorts of things we could use across the piece for the public sector, definitely. John, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Scott, thank you for your presentation. I suppose I'm just wanting to look at the online survey that's currently being done. I'm just wondering if there will be a number of people in Dumfries and Galloway and across the country who won't be able to access that because they're digitally excluded. I made that point earlier. If we're doing consultations and surveys, we need to make sure that we're capturing as many options and opinions as possible. So I'm wondering what thought has been given and whether there will be alternative options to allow all our communities to have that equal say.
Thanks for your point, John. Yeah, I completely agree. For your awareness, we have conducted a number of drop-in events in stations locally, Stranraer, Newton Stewart. We've had, pop-in events in the local supermarkets as well. So, and we've had other groups in stations. So we are doing, a blended approach. But yeah, I accept your point that there will be a sector of our community that will not be able to access that. There is hard copies, so we can share out hard copies as well in different formats as well. So I will feed that back into our PIC team who are dealing with and leading on this piece of work.
Scott, thanks for the presentation. My comments pick up a bit on what Julie said earlier about the sort of preventative role. I think all organisations are being challenged to move away from a responsive role into one where we try to encourage prevention. So I would echo her thoughts and your suggestions about moving into a preventative model. I'd be interested to know, based on the things like the fires in the outdoor areas and the flooding risks, what role the fire service can develop as being a significant advisor to planning authorities, environmental authorities, etc., forestry commissions, etc., to encourage them to be aware of the preventative measures they can take on board to reduce the frequency of those sorts of incidents, because it feels like that's a significant role you can play to try to reduce the numbers of incidents and to try and potentially have some mitigation against things like flood risks as well.
Thanks for your comments, Chair. Obviously, in terms of wildfires and kind of that type of incident, Scottish Fire and Rescue have no legal authority. We're not statutory consultees, but yes, we have dialogue with them, but that's predominantly in that response phase. So there probably is an opportunity to be more front-facing and have that kind of preventive discussions. But as it stands, when we have no legal powers in that. In terms of flooding, we work with our partners to obviously and the local authority to that kind of resilience, through that risk preparedness and looking at those areas, flood risks, an example, and helping communities to become resilient and making sure that we have the appropriate resources in the local area and they're trained to respond to those incidents. So it's about very much about the prevention work with flooding and making communities resilient. So, and the service appreciates that. We anticipate by 2080 there'll be another 110,000 properties on this. Something I think it's like, just confirm the figures, but we've got 280,000 properties that are at risk of flooding just now, and that's expected to increase by another 110,000 by 2080. So the service is aware that this is a significant and growing risk.
Thank you, Scott. I think Val wanted to come in.
Oh, sorry. Not used to these here. I'm just wondering. So we've got our place planning partnership under the CPP, and we've got our locality hubs under the CPP as well. And I wonder how good we are at using these forums that we've already got to kind of maybe gather views and things. And I think the locality hubs are really keen to be really active and engaged with their communities. So I just wonder if we need to kind of think about some of those kind of consultations, big things about how we maybe use those, use the place planning structures and the locality hub structures as well to get that kind of real engagement and feedback.
No, thanks, Varia. I appreciate the point. I can certainly feed that back to our PIC team, who are obviously leading this piece of work on behalf of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, because I think that's not just something for Dumfries and Galloway, it's probably across the whole of Scotland. There's an opportunity there.
And would that not address some of the issues that John raised around how to engage with communities? If that's the sort of model that could be expanded on, we're more likely to reach into those communities, wouldn't we, I guess? So, Dawn.
Thank you, and thank you, Scott, for the presentation. Conscious that this is a live consultation, and organisations will have the opportunity to feed back as part of that process. I'm just interested in the estate piece in terms of property and estate, and whether there's just so that it helps me think about opportunities locally. Is there work already underway around estate planning for blue light across Scotland in terms of that potential collaboration and joint approach to blue light services? And then I'm struck also for the opportunity to explore public sector estate planning. So it's not so much about the very local kind of transformational change stuff within communities, it's more a strategic estate planning approach in terms of particularly public sector, and whether from a fire and rescue point of view you're aware of any of that work. So blue light and public sector estate. And then I would just say absolutely support Julie's point around prevention, early intervention, really critical. And also around participation, youth participation, engagement with young people, all of that, and the work of the Fire and Rescue Service in promoting and facilitating that activity. It's really valuable. So just points to consider as organisations consider their responses to the consultation. So just interested in blue light planning and estate planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, so the service have just recently completed or undertaken a piece of work with PricewaterhouseCoopers to look at our corporate services and look at where they can make improvements, and that is around about the sharing of those corporate services with other partners. And there is obviously work ongoing as well in the service, looking with the police and ambulance service about those opportunities for tri-party working. So yeah, it's very much something that is being looked at a national level within the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service.
Obviously, I think part of Dawn's question isn't something that the fire service itself can resolve, is it? If there's a need for a region-wide or even Scotland-wide public sector estates planning sort of programme, I think we should be making representation for that to sort of take place, so that all partners can consider how they're dealing with their estate in a sort of collaborative way. I think that would address some of the questions Judy raised as well. Okay, Scott.
Just to clarify, in terms of to talk about state, I'm talking about the figures that are quoted obviously nationally. I'd just like to give some reassurance to the members that the estate within Dumfries and Galloway is a relatively good and positive picture. Obviously, there's been investment since we transformed into the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, that's seen stations being upgraded and maintained. So we are in a healthy position. There's obviously room to improve in terms of contaminants, but the overall state as it stands just now across the region is a positive picture.
That's very good to hear. Thank you very much for that, Scott. Any final comments to Scott? Okay, obviously aware, as Dawn's pointed out and reaffirmed, it's a live consultation process. We're looking for people to engage in it, so that as many of the options as possible can be explored through the fire services consultation work. And we'll look forward to, at some point, being involved in seeing the outcomes of the consultation work and the options that you're being presented, particularly when it has an impact on Dumfries and Galloway. Thank you, Scott. Item 8 is our business briefs. Over to Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things to bring to your attention. Firstly, at 3.1 within the report, an update on the COVID Remembering Together project, and that work is coming to a conclusion. And as you can see there's community gathering events taking place across the month of June. And a link to the website as well there for further information. Also, what's been included for interest is that Scottish Government have recently produced an updated action plan to tackle depopulation, and that's going to be key for community planning and work linked to the LOIP going forward. So just again included some narrative that would be of interest, particularly interesting at 3.2.4 where they've identified borders in Dumfries and Galloway and the importance of spatial strategies and local development plans in terms of improving local livability, low carbon network towns and sustainable rural development. And obviously there's consultations ongoing at the moment on the LDP. So again, really important there. And also within the narrative, there's £30,000 that's been made available to the council to investigate into more detail some of the reasons behind population decline, etc. So I thought it was really interesting stuff in terms of the board and our work going forward through the leadership team. So that's all I would want to highlight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Any questions? Alan.
Thanks, Chair. Just on that point that Stephen's highlighted on 3.2.4 on the £30,000 investment in council, it's just an update in terms of where does that discovery work then go back through? Because it's obviously council is an accountable body for doing the discovery work. How might that information come back into community planning structure, I guess is my question, given that it's led by a single organisation? If that's known, if it's not, fair, but if it is, helpful.
Yeah, I did speak to the lead officer within the council, so it's still at early stages in terms of drawdown, and I think there's also an option to attract some further funding. So I'm sure we can get an update together for the next report, but just make sure it's timely enough that in terms of work that might be needed involving partners that's captured. But I'm sure it's on the lead officer's radar to do that, Alan. But I'm quite happy to follow up just to confirm. Yeah.
Julie.
Yeah, I suppose just to add to that, Stephen, I think it would be really helpful, just speaking from a health point of view, to be part of that in terms of that kind of understanding about that rationale for depopulation and the opportunities that might exist in terms of increasing that population. I think for a number of reasons. I think obviously all of, and I'm sure, I speak on behalf of, I'm sure all of the partners would be keen to be involved in it, because I think we're all really badly affected at the moment by that depopulation, in terms of our ability to staff our services, our ability to deliver the type of support that we want to. So I think really valuable comment, I think, from Alan around how we link the wider partners around that piece of work, because I think in terms of undertaking that research as well, there's potentially skills elsewhere across the partnership and some of the organisations that could tie into that and support some of that, because £30,000 will go so far, but it's not going to be able to do it all. So I think that it's maybe worth a conversation through the community planning senior leadership team around what that piece of work might look like and how all partners might engage with that in terms of the participation in the work, but also then sharing some of that learning and understanding what comes out of it. So maybe just echoing and adding to some of those comments from Alan. Thanks.
Yes, Steve, come in here.
Sorry.
No, thanks for highlighting that, Julian. It makes sense to maybe try and get it back into the leadership team, but Valerie has also offered support in terms of the range of data intelligence that's held within health. So I have fed that back to the lead officer, and he knows to reach out when the appropriate time comes. So thanks for that.
I've got Andy Ferguson on the line.
Okay, good afternoon, Nick. I'm just picking up on what Stephen was saying there at 3.2.3 about this, really the third bullet point, the third, fourth and fifth bullet points. First, there needs to be a recognition in there that, yes, in the future the population is going to drop, but the complexities or the care needs of the older people and the additional support learning for younger people and the effects of COVID, which we don't know yet what effect that's going to have in future generations, is whilst the numbers are going to drop, we can't actually count on that, because the call on our resources might actually increase even though we've got a lower population. So I'm just wondering what we're actually doing to long-term planning in that respect.
Yeah, just be clear a bit more about your question, Andy. I wasn't quite sure who we need to point that to in terms of trying to get an answer.
Well, I'm not so sure if it's a question, Nick, or whether it's a general comment. about where we as a planning partnership need to be looking at for the future is that it's easy to say that, you know, with these figures are going to show the drops and the changes, that those are statistics that are born out of research, I get that, but the growth in people aged over 65 and the increase in the number of youngsters who will have additional support needs or suffering the effects, really long-term effects of COVID, which we don't know yet what that will be, is how are we taking into account that longer-term planning? So we're talking in the public health reign here, I would suggest. So how do we actually look at this and say, well, what's the prognosis for 20 years' time, for example?
Yeah, I'm going to bring in Val, and I've got something to comment on myself as well. Val?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I suppose there's kind of connected pieces of work to this. There is the strategic needs assessment and the latest population census study. So we've agreed through community planning structures to try and have a joined up approach to the kind of strategic needs assessment. So that will be looking at data and saying, you know, what's happening, what are the needs of our population, what do we need to plan to, and that then obviously will connect into the integration joint board in terms of our future commissioning plan. But I think it'll be useful for all our organisations as well. So that's in progress over this next year. I think this is maybe a slightly different piece of work in terms of we know that there is depopulation happening. What are some of the causes and what are some of the actions we need to take to do it? So I think they're kind of connected, but they're kind of slightly different as well.
Thank you, Val. I mean, Andy, you'll be aware that the issue of depopulation for this area has been something I've been concerned about ever since I've been on the CPP, and we've been pushing for a potential growth in the population as one of our key strategic objectives for some time now. And I think we need to put some reality behind that sort of challenge, really. Most of the other things we talk about around the CPP are determined by our population. So in my mind, the economic well-being of this area is determined by the numbers of working age population we have, because they're the ones that bring income into the area. That has a direct impact on the health of the population, because there's a direct link between economic viability and the health of families, etc. So there's a whole range of links here, all come down. So the population of Dumfries and Galloway and the risks we have relative to the increasing demands that will be placed on us by the ageing population is one of the most existential threats to this Dumfries and Galloway area, in my mind, and we need to do some significant work to address it. So I recognise the desire to use things like the 30k pay funds to try and do some scoping work on what are the key issues that address that. I think the bigger challenge is how do we get all organisations to collectively working together here to recognise that actions they take could have unforeseen consequences on the population drive or the desire to increase our working age populations. And without getting into examples, because you could end up being a political area here, decisions made by any body potentially have an impact on other bodies, but they also have an impact on our potential to drive increasing in population and draw people in from other parts of the world, but also to prevent people from leaving. And I think we need to collectively work together on our population strategy in support of the Scottish population strategy to make sure we maximise our own organisation's contributions. We had the conversation from Nick earlier about poverty, and him taking a very clear statement about he would like to be able to engage with you on your strategies to check that what you're doing is having an impact positively on the poverty issue. I think we need to find a similar model here for assessing all our organisations' contributions to our annual plans. Recognise we're autonomous bodies. We have a right to make our own decisions. We have a responsibility to do so too. But if we share them with our partners, there's possibilities that we could identify mitigating actions that would have a greater impact on improving our population position. That's my parting shot, I guess. Okay. Andy, so no direct answer to that challenge. I think what you've identified is that is the big squeeze on us, that the population is reducing, but the pressures are going to increase on all of our bodies. So we need to find some urgent way of dealing with that in the near future. And if we engage locally on the Scottish strategy plan, and then do our own work collectively, we potentially could come up with some mitigating actions. I think I've taken a soapbox position for a bit long there, haven't I? So forgive me. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for that. On to the risk register.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The senior leadership team have taken a keen look at what was the previous risk register, and particularly through Valerie as chair, and reviewed what was the previous 4 risks. And just an interrogation, there was quite a lot of overlap and duplication there. So the leadership team managed to reduce those from 4 down to 2. But there was also discussion about, was there a risk that sufficiently outlined what the risk would be to vulnerable individuals within our communities and communities themselves if community planning were to fail. And that could be, young people at, at severe risk of harm, etc. So there was a 3rd risk developed specifically to look at that. So the revised 3 risks are attached in the appendix, really for approval. And I say that's been worked through the leadership team with the various views and opinions taken on board. And the risk ratings themselves also revised to take into account the current operating context that partners are working in as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the work on that, Val and colleagues. Any comments? Specifically, we're happy to adopt that 3rd risk and the rewording of the risks now into our set of papers. Yeah. Okay, that's agreed and accepted. Thank you very much. Forward plan.
Thank you. Yep, the focus, obviously, for our September meeting, we've got the joint meeting with the Youth Council scheduled in. So I'll certainly be working with co-chairs just to look at agenda management, because that on its own could take the majority of the meeting. It was previously agreed that there would be a focus on children's rights, but I think there's opportunities there also to work with the new Youth Council priorities and how that links to the LOIP, and have some really rich discussion around that. So I'm taking that forward with Mark Malloy, the Youth Work Manager. And then in terms of the remainder of that meeting and the final meeting of the year in December, we've got various items in terms of the update on the local development plan consultation, which is just starting to near an end. So I'm in contact with all these officers to try and schedule in those updates before the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions? Okay, again, another parting comment. The 10,000 Voices exercise, I think, is one of the most exciting exercises I think I've been involved with through the CPP. And I think we were the only CPP area that had a 2nd round of the 10,000 Voices. I'm assuming we've got commitment to a 3rd round when that's necessary, have we, at some point?
I'm sure Mark would seek the funding to do a 3rd one and keep that going, absolutely. Yeah.
And finally, the 10,000 Voices have been a really good opportunity to hear the voice of the collective voice of our young people across Dumfries and Galloway. But in a recent conversation with some young people, they were also interested in listening to some of the key challenges organisations are facing locally, so that we can get their views on how we should address those. So if we can perhaps make the 10,000 Voices conversation not just about hearing the voice of the concerns of our younger people, but what is their response to the concerns that organisations have about what we're trying to do to plan for the future. I don't know if that's possible, but that's certainly what some of the younger people were saying to me. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we've accepted the forward plan, and obviously in September we may also get a conversation about the poverty work as well. Okay. Dawn, did you want to come in? I'm about to close. Yeah, we've managed to get ourselves way back on track of time, so we're about to finish. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, my voice is going. The leader of the council, Gail McGregor's, had to drop off because her connection's not very good. So she's just asked me to come in at the end of the meeting, Chair, and say thank you for your role and contribution to the Community Planning Partnership Board over a number of years. And I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the leader and the council, but probably on behalf of all members of the board, that we've really valued your chairing of meetings, your contributions, your thoughts, the challenge that you bring into this space in terms of what we could be focusing on, how we work together, how we get the most out of the collective contribution of organisations in Dumfries and Galloway. So I hope you enjoy the next phase of your life. I'm sorry about my voice. The next phase for you, and we wish you well for the future. But just on behalf of all partners involved in the Community Planning Partnership Board, thank you for your contribution and the impact that you've had.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, everybody. And it's been a delight being part of the group. And I have seen it evolve and develop in a way that I think is really tremendous over the last 5 or 6 years. So thank you to all the people who've made that happen, because it's down to yourselves and the many thousands of people that work behind the scenes making this work. I do have a belief that when you're in a position like this, you have a responsibility to provide some sort of leadership. You shouldn't be in a position like this unless you have a view about the world and how it should operate. So I thank the group for being considerate to some of the points I wanted to put across, and on occasions agreed with me. But collectively, I think we are moving in the right direction. And particularly, I want to thank Stephen and Val, and also Richard Greaveson, who did an awful lot of work in the last few years as well to bring this group and the SLT into a good place to be as well. So can I thank you particularly for your work behind the scenes on the CPP and for supporting me and the chairs of this group over the last 5 or 6 years. And thank you to everybody else. Best wishes for the rest of the day.